Before I begin, I just want to thank Richard for the introduction, as well as thank the Landscape Architecture Foundation for the invitation to be here with you all today. As most of you are well aware, Ian McHarg often wrote and spoke of what he termed his litany. That is, the various subject matter and concerns that he felt that every landscape architect should actively engage and address in their work. As we heard earlier, this litany forms a central tenet of the 1966 Declaration of Concern, with McHarg and his colleagues arguing that students and practitioners, quote, must know geology, physiography, climatology, and ecology to know why the world's physical features are where they are, and why plants, animals, and man flourish in some places and not in others, end quote. The Declaration continues on, asserting that only once designers are able to, quote, interpret a landscape through these lenses are they properly prepared to plan and to design the environment. Never mind the value of understanding what is motivating the physical transformation of this environment in the first place. The 1966 Declaration of Concern, in essence, advocates for landscape architecture to be understood as an applied arm of the natural sciences, ostensibly fixing the intellectual orientation and interest of the discipline for the better part of the last half-century. While the logic behind this declaration is understandable, given the discipline's widely accepted origin story, not to mention the particular cultural moment in which it is written, I choose to reject it as far too narrow in scope to continue to serve as a useful disciplinary apparatus. For example, rather than what McHarg suggested would be the, quote, emancipation of landscape architecture, end quote, I contend that the discipline's strident subscription to biotic ecology above all else has unnecessarily foreclosed on what I would characterize as other essential landscape concerns in favor of things like metrics and performance and data and biomimicry. This foreclosure on all things not biotic has served to limit the disciplinary imagination of the landscape architect, preventing it from achieving a much greater and more significant cultural agency over the last half-century. Given this limitation, in combination with the global urbanization forecast that we just heard earlier, I would argue that now is an ideal time to establish a revised litany for the 21st century landscape architect, one that is far more multivalent and nimble than the original Declaration of Concern. To begin, I would advocate for a revision that is centered less on purely environmental interests and more on developing a deeper and more fuller understanding of those political, economic, and socio-cultural machinations that are motivating the urbanization activities at the center of the discipline's current and future work. Active engagement with the underlying drivers and impulses of contemporary urbanization is as important, if not more important, than simply endeavoring to limit or soften or undo their effect. Such an approach serves to extend the discipline's field of engagement while simultaneously expanding its rhetorical kit and its means of evaluation. I make this assertion as someone who is not formally trained as a landscape architect, but rather as someone who came to the discipline because of what I saw as its potential capacity for negotiating urban issues. Particularly compelling is landscape architecture's latent facility to synthesize a variety of competing and often contradictory concerns, economic and social, infrastructural and cultural, and yes, environmental, into actionable strategies and solutions that are both physical and procedural. In this regard, landscape as a disciplinary apparatus offers a powerful set of instruments for negotiating the myriad challenges related to the future urban condition, if and only if it escapes the burden of advocating and evaluating its work solely through the environmental or the more now de rigueur ecological terms. While such a contention may be viewed as heresy within a setting such as this, I believe it is a necessary truth that the discipline must confront in order to preclude the reduction of landscape architecture to a mere technical vocation, rather than elevating it to the essential cultural project the 1966 Declaration of Concern implies that it can be. Pursuing such a shift would allow the discipline of landscape architecture to begin to recapture much of the scope lost to architecture and planning, returning it to its rightful place as the principal discipline responsible for the organization of new settlement and infrastructure, a role that landscape architecture held for the better part of its first century of existence. To substantiate this argument, I'd like to sketch out three tenets upon which it's predicated. To begin, we must accept that the conceptual binary of urban and non-urban that the original Declaration of Concern relied upon is no longer valid. Rather, to paraphrase Lefebvre, all that is affected by anthropogenic concerns is made urban, and as such, the entire landscape of the Earth, both physically and conceptually as we know it today, must be understood as an urbanized condition of varying intensities. As a result, the fundamental question confronting planners and designers is no longer a matter of where, but rather a question of how. How does one go about influencing, managing, and negotiating those intensities, formats, and consequences of the anthropogenic regimes that are continuously remaking the landscape of the Earth. Such questions simply cannot be answered solely by relying on the natural sciences as our guide. Rather, we must look to the broader motivations and drivers of these regimes in order to uncover how landscape architecture might actively engage, infiltrate, inflect, and influence their undertaking. Secondly, urbanization activities, particularly the construction of new settlement and infrastructure, have long been understood as the physical manifestation of economic growth. However, I would argue that this correlation can no longer be accepted as valid. Rather, urbanization activities are increasingly the result of speculative motivations, deployed as catalysts in pursuit of uncommon economic gain and righteous projections of political power. The result is the rapid and radical remaking of the Earth's physical landscape, particularly in those polities deemed as emerging. Demographic and market realities have given way to highly speculative pursuits focused almost exclusively on the physical products of urbanization, treating them as transactional instruments necessary to elevate global economic and political status. Given the artificiality of their demand, these speculative activities have a high propensity for failure, either through incompletion, abandonment, inaccessibility, or pervasive vacancy, and in turn result in both severe near-term and long-term consequences. The implication here is that planners and designers can no longer train their attention solely on the preferred outcomes of their work, given that the increasingly low likelihood of these pursuits actually coming to fruition. Rather, future work must pursue active mechanisms of adjustment, modulation, and contingency, as well as the potential for designed abandonment or repurposing. In order for design and planning to produce these more dynamic formats of urbanization, they must be cognizant of and actively engage with the systems and agendas that are motivating these urbanization activities in the first place. Third, while it's encouraging to see an increasing number of schools and practitioners looking to expand the discipline's topic of concern beyond what has become known as the traditional scope of the landscape architect, far too much of this recent work is centered on the wholesale replacement of existing formats of settlement and infrastructure in pursuit of novel systems conceived of almost exclusively from self-described ecological concerns. While the ambition is commendable, the potential erosion of cultural credibility of the discipline risks in promoting these kind of projects is not. We all know how a similar design hubris in the mid-20th century led to a loss of cultural agency by both the architecture and planning discipline that neither has yet to recover from. Instead of advocating naive totalizing visions, I encourage the pursuit of strategies of inflection, appropriation, and subversion. While slower and perhaps rhetorically and formally less dramatic, such an approach has a far greater capacity to produce real, fundamental, and established influence. To discover these moments of potential operation, conditions of loose fit, slippage, or surplus, it's essential to again understand the fundamental principles that have motivated the construction of these existing systems of urbanization. While the natural sciences do provide one lens, searching for potential means of intervention under these terms alone is unnecessarily reductive. However, if the field of disciplinary operations expanded beyond its preoccupation with biotic ecology to include active engagement with political, economic, and sociocultural concerns, significantly more opportunities for potential action and intervention quickly come into focus. In conclusion, I do not make these assertions to diminish the environmental and the social concerns that have typified the work of landscape architecture over the past half-century. Rather, my interest here is in elevating what I would characterize as other fundamental landscape and urban concerns to a commensurate status in order to move landscape architecture beyond its unnecessarily limited focus to a more multivalent, actionable, and efficacious orientation. If landscape concerns are truly to have a central role in the ongoing processes of urbanization being seen globally, for them to function as physical structuring devices, conceptual organizing logics, or actionable policy instruments, and not simply as tidy little neoliberal ornaments of green, they must be argued for and explained in the political, economic, and sociocultural terms of global urbanization. Only then will landscape architecture begin to approach its potential as the truly essential cultural project the 1966 Declaration of Concern implied that it could be. Thank you.